Joining me on the program now, geopolitical commentator Geoffrey Miller. Geoffrey, nice to chat with you again.
Good morning, Andrew. Thanks for having me back on your show.
A huge week for the UN, of course. 80 years since the UN was founded. Well, there continues to be concerns about how effective it has been as a body, although I would go as far as to say that I think the world is a better place because of the UN over the last 80 years. Not a perfect organisation, of course, but there are some things to celebrate.
Indeed, Andrew. And look, the UN is not perfect, and that's probably an understatement.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's only as strong as the will of its members, and it's only as strong as the will of the permanent five members on the UN Security Council that can and do often veto all kinds of things that we would like to see happen, probably from the New Zealand perspective. But that's the price you pay, because the UN was established in 1945 very much with the consent of those great powers, the victors of World War II. In other words, the United States, China, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so they had to, they would only agree to this organization being established if they had a right of veto on anything important that it did.
Yeah.
And that's the system that we've got, where anything that's truly important has to go before the UN Security Council. And one of those five countries, now we have Russia rather than the Soviet Union, is the country that inherited that right of veto. But one of those five countries, if one of those five countries disagrees with something, they can and do veto it. And the United States has used its veto 6 times since October 7th, 2023. So they've used that 6 times when it comes to resolutions on the war in Gaza. At other times, it's been other countries vetoing things. So that's just the system that we have. We know the rules of the game. And it's quite clear we have to work around those rules. And in the end, the UN still offers a huge amount of benefit for a country like New Zealand. And if you just look at the number of meetings that Winston Peters, the foreign minister, has had with counterparts, with foreign ministers from Iceland, from Singapore, the King of Jordan, the United Arab Emirates foreign minister, I could go on. There's a huge list of foreign ministers and leaders that he has met this week. Where else would you get the chance to do that? You just don't get that opportunity in the other formats in which New Zealand is involved. The best would probably be the Commonwealth or APEC, for example. But even they are dwarfed by the UN in terms of membership. So the value of the UN is pretty much that everyone is there and everyone's around the table.
It certainly has been a controversial meeting, and hey, this is part of the nature of it, is the UN headquarters in New York. Notoriously bad traffic, of course, even worse this last week with all these heads of state and roads being closed, etc. I hear Winston missed a gala dinner for the second time in a row just because he couldn't get through the gridlock traffic.
Yeah, it does seem quite extraordinary. You think about it, Winston Peters and the foreign ministers, this is the whole reason why this event is taking place, really. And yet the diplomats couldn't get to the dinner. So Winston Peters missed out on a chance to rub shoulders with Donald Trump.
Yep.
So he said he was, quote, brassed off about that, and particularly because it was the second year in a row. And yeah, it is a shame, but it is incompetent on the part of the authorities there on the ground, and you just can't really understand how that could be allowed to happen, and how common sense couldn't prevail. You sort of wonder, could he not have got out of the car and walked, or could they not have made some other provision to get him there? It's a very small area there in New York City where all these events are taking place. You can't imagine he was that far away, but yet he was too far away to get to that dinner.
Of course, the hilarious video of Emmanuel Macron from France actually doing that, hopping out of the car, jumping on the phone to Donald Trump to say, I can't get through the traffic, they've closed the city because of you, and then just hopping out of the car and walking. Donald Trump certainly has garnered some attention. And with broken auto cues and broken escalators, his welcoming speech, some people have described it as anything but welcoming.
You couldn't script it better if you're Donald Trump. What is it with Donald Trump and escalators? You remember when he announced his candidacy way back in 2015,
Yeah,
going down the escalator at Trump Tower, and now this broken escalator, which seems that by going by the reports that have come out, it was the emergency stop button was tripped by Donald Trump's own videographer. Or at
yeah,
least that's the version we're being told by the UN. I'm sure, like most of these things, we'll never truly know
mm,
why the escalator was stopped. But we certainly do know that the issue with the teleprompter that happened in the chamber was a result of the White House, because it was the White House's own teleprompter that malfunctioned.
yeah,
So I don't know. In the end, Trump is just a walking headline machine, and these images that come out, it won't do him any harm at all. And of course, he was able to use that in his speech and make out that it was the UN's fault. You know, it's quite incredible just the way that things just seem to happen with Donald Trump, the photo ops that he gets, and the way that he's able to turn these mishaps in a way, and issues and problems that happen into gold. But then he gave a real dressing down in his speech, and again it was classic Trump, calling climate change the greatest con job perpetrated on the world, and you know, he tore strips off countries for failing to control immigration policies. Your countries are going to hell. I mean,
yeah,
an incredibly memorable line and a most undiplomatic one. And that's what Donald Trump is famous for. He just cuts through all this diplomatic language, calls a spade, in the view of his supporters, and that's why he's popular.
yeah.
He is the populist leader who comes through and cuts through all of these niceties. Is not afraid to just speak his mind. He certainly makes it interesting, whether you agree or not with him. It'd be by far probably one of the most watched speeches at the UN General Assembly this year or any year,
Yeah.
really. And because it was interesting, and I mean, I think, you know, other leaders and ministers, they might like to reflect on that. I don't think that means you necessarily need to be like Trump, but just speaking in a way that everyone can understand and making your points, I think, very, very clear and unmistakable. I think that is something perhaps more diplomats could do, because it is you know, for its detractors, the UN General Assembly does often seem like a bit of a snooze fest, because each leader or foreign minister gets up there and has their statement and so forth. But there's very little that ever stays in the mind of people who, you know, if you think about it over the years, how many other UN General Assembly speeches can you remember? Are there
Yeah.
any memorable lines? They don't tend to be speeches that live on in the you know, collective global memory. So
Yeah.
Donald Trump certainly changing that.
Hey, Winston Peters' reaction to that speech, I mean, that in itself is interesting. People are trying to speculate about which way will Winston go on recognising Palestine. That he was critical of Donald Trump's speech may be an indication there, but Winston Peters has been creating his own headlines by dropping truth bombs at a climate change breakfast recently. Hey, I know there are some even within New Zealand First who aren't big fans of climate change, but Winston Peters calling the big polluters to account on this one.
It was interesting. He said, pointed out 4 countries comprise 60% of the world's emissions. And the rest of the 191 countries are wrestling with this problem, quoting Winston Peters there. And that was described then by an official, I believe, as a truth bomb.
Yep.
Interesting, because of course this would be very much on in a way on in sync with Donald Trump,
Yep.
although the United States therefore is one of those big four. So you might not perhaps appreciate that bit, but you know, he is, I think Winston Peters is interesting in that he does tend to go all in all different directions. And this week, you know, you could probably find evidence that he's going in one way when it comes to the Palestinian issue, and evidence that he's going the other way.
Yeah.
He's made himself the center of attention this week at the UN General Assembly by holding his cards very close to his chest. And I think when you look at the broad range of people who've wanted to talk to him, you know, ranging from the King of Jordan, as I said, to the UAE foreign minister in the Middle East,
Yep.
European foreign ministers, the German foreign minister, the Canadian foreign minister, you know, all manner of individuals have talked to Winston Peters, going by the photos that Mr. Peters himself has been publishing on his X account.
Yeah.
And that's because New Zealand's position is not yet certain. So, of course, what will be being discussed is, well, you should be recognizing a Palestinian state, or no, you should be perhaps rethinking that. It was interesting, Winston Peters also met with the Singaporean foreign minister this week, and Singapore has decided not to recognize a Palestinian state immediately. It doesn't mean that they're not open to it, but they want the state to be viable, and they want a Palestinian state to recognize Israel's right to exist. But they've said, well, we will reserve the right to reconsider if the situation deteriorates, or if Israel does things that are not conducive to the formation of a Palestinian state. In other words, if Israel expands illegal settlements, they will reconsider potentially this decision. So it's an interesting one, because they come at it from a different perspective, than the United States, which is against a Palestinian state, full stop, and supporting Israel 100%. Singapore is a bit more nuanced than that, and in a sense, they're going to keep some leverage, perhaps because of that position. You just wonder whether Winston Peters is considering that as an option, and that could be. It could be the outcome. I still think the most likely outcome is that New Zealand does join Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and others in supporting a Palestinian state and its recognition. 157 states out of 193 in the United Nations now recognize a Palestinian state. It is by far the majority position. There aren't that many states in the world that do not recognize a Palestinian state. So if New Zealand does not recognize a Palestinian state in the early hours of tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, it will be an outlier. And I think it would be a surprise. But, Winston Peters is good for surprises.
He is good for surprises.
And he's rule out anything.
He's keeping us guessing, even with his photo opportunities in New York at the moment. But we watch this space, and hey, we'll all know more in 24 hours or so, I understand. Jeffrey, thanks for your analysis and your insight. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe, and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.